The Silent Hill 2 remake doesn't look promising. From its developer to its focus on combat to, well, Konami. But everything has a chance to be good before it comes out, and there's one thing that Bloober Team can do to put this game a step above even the Resident Evil remakes. With all of these iconic horror games being remade for the modern day, each and every one of them has lost something that makes them unique and that defines them as games from a bygone era, their comedy. Black comedy often deals with the same subject matter as horror stories, but the lens through which we view them has an extremely different tint of glass. It's these early horror games that began to use glasses instead of a telescope. God, I hope that analogy makes sense. Whether intentionally or not, the classic Resident Evil titles have some ridiculous lines of dialogue that work in contrast to the scary subject matter of what we're fighting. It's a moment from reprieve from the do-or-die survival against the zombies. The issue is that the intensity of the comedy doesn't match the horror. That's not to say these games weren't scary, they were just too funny. The idiocy of Jill Sandwich just can't be matched by any horror elements present in the game. Eventually, Resident Evil would hit the perfect balance of comedy and horror with RE4, where the Horde-style tense combat meshed with the corny one-liners and B-movie vibe. Then they gave up on trying to be scary altogether, but the less said about that, the better. Now, if there was ever a game where this balance would be impossible to hit, I would say it's Silent Hill 2, a depressing, macabre, grotesque study of guilt and the terrors of one's mind, dealing with subject matters no PS2 gamer was prepared to deal with. The tone is just too bleak and unrepentant for any joke to help balance out the sheer depravity of the atmosphere and visuals. And that's okay, it just means Silent Hill 2 is a serious game that doesn't have any room for levity, and is more concerned with being artistic than entertaining. At least, that's what you might think. The team thought of the only thing that could possibly counteract a game with monster sex and suicide, and that would be the dog ending, which revealed in a secret ending that the whole game was being controlled by a Shiba. Now, it's impossible to get this ending on your first playthrough, though I can only imagine how funny that would have been for someone. The dog ending actually says a lot more about Silent Hill 2 than you might think. It shows that the developers don't want you to analyze every detail of the game. They want you to just let some things be there for fun. People will often break down games with multiple endings to explain what they represent and which ending is the most narratively satisfying and why. Team Silent doesn't want you to do that. They want you to enjoy the game for what it is, and they're saying you don't need to look for the symbolism in everything, because you'll never find a way to fit a dog into your theory. Unfortunately, they shot themselves in the foot, because as I understand it, there's a theory that this dog is a character from a later game, but that wasn't the intention at the time. It also supports my claim that horror and comedy are two sides of the same coin, as this outrageous ending is the only thing that could possibly reflect the repulsiveness of the main game. But how does this all tie back into the Silent Hill 2 remake, and ensure that the game is more worthy than any of the Resident Evil remakes? When the RE games were being remade, they removed the comedy aspects of their games. They made them as serious as possible, which is why I was so scared to go into the Resident Evil 4 remake. The comedy is such a big part of why that game works. I haven't played the remake, but I did watch the cutscene movie, and while it didn't erase the levity like 2 and 3, it tones itself down, which, while not as interesting, is disappointing. I don't really want to see Ashley deal with the abject horror of her unthinkable situation. I wanted her to be the first to die in a horror movie trope girl with a screechy voice. The whole fun of her character is that I don't like her. The same goes for Dead Space. Isaac Clarke now speaks, because, well, it didn't make sense for him not to speak in the original. But that was the fun of it, blankly taking orders to go deeper into the Ishimura without protest. That was the quirkiness and complexity of Dead Space, and they removed it so that the remake could be more serious and modern. Comedy in games is dying in general, so it's disheartening to see things that once were funny getting removed from games that originally had them because they're trying to look more mature. they end up looking more like adolescent teenagers rather than mature adults. So if Bloober Team makes the wise decision to keep the dog ending in Silent Hill 2, it would be far more faithful than any horror game remake in the last few years. While the game can still mess up in a million other ways, this would at least reassure me that someone over there gets it. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about my favourite PS2 games, including Silent Hill 2.